Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I like. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Person of Interest. So this week we had back-to-back episodes. So first of all, I'll talk about the first episode, which we had... mainly it was kind of about Root trying to finally track down Shaw. We've seen like one or two particular jobs essentially that the machine center on. The first one being like her being a ballerina, which was kind of nice, and that basically one guy came there and he was like, "Oh, I'm a big fan of yours," and then basically she saved him. He's just like, "Marry me." It was kind of neat. It would have been nice to see Root as a ballerina. Just to see what kind of moves she's got, you know, just to see how good she is. I mean, he was so enamored by her, so she had to be pretty freaking awesome. So, but obviously, she wants a machine to help her find Shaw. It's like all this time, you know, she's like with the system finally being open. She knows, she's like, I know it's a little dangerous, but divert some of your attention divert some of your power and attention to finding Shaw. And essentially, he sends Root on basically to a number, which eventually, a number, she gets a new identity and is connected to helping her find Shaw. Essentially, she helps out a guy named Max. He talks on a radio station, kind of a, not necessarily a conspiracy nut, well, yes, but more in there are higher intelligence out there, like aliens and beings and such like that, which, you know, with Root around is just kind of like, okay, yeah, you have no idea, essentially. So you can obviously tell Max kind of initially liked her just because she was just like, you know, because she has experience dealing with a superior being and whatnot, so a being of higher intelligence and power, so, you know. But essentially, you ended up finding out, because basically he had gotten a hidden message, and you end up finding out that hidden message is actually how Samaritan communicates with its operatives. That's how, like, any of its operatives can stay low-key, and they'll know when to act when they hear that message. It kind of appears as interference, but he had actually gotten someone else to look into it, a guy named Warren, who, like, had some military background, so he could have looked into it. But, you know, John was there and he ended up coming to the guy's house. The guy's been dead for a couple hours, yet at the same time he was dead, he was still talking on the radio. So Samaritan faked his suicide and then basically took voice clippings and basically created an algorithm to basically mimic his voice and say what they needed him to say. It was just like, wow. That's like very cold-blooded. Just because they were looking into how Samaritan communicates. And what I found fascinating was the fact is the moment that came out, it immediately disguised itself as more as Max and started talking about the fact is that, oh, Max is right. Like basically it was setting it up so that when Max died, everyone treated it like a suicide. It's like, oh, he's just crazy, and he finally killed himself after all this. So it's very interesting, like finally seeing that kind of piece together. And at the same time in this episode, we also got, well, for one, we found out that Fusco's still okay. Granted, he's a little bitter because the whole team won't let him in on everything. He even returned the phone that Harold uses to communicate. And he's just like, you know, you guys aren't going to let me in on this, so just screw you. I mean, even later on, in the second half of the second episode, he basically asked for a new partner because he doesn't want to be teamed up with John anymore. Which is like, it's understandable why they're doing what they're doing. Like, I 100% get it. They want to protect him because they've seen what happens in this world. A lot of good people die, and they don't want him to do that because they do legitimately care for him. Each and every one of them care for Fusco, and they don't want him to get involved. But it is also idiotic of them to believe that they can keep him out of this. For one, he is a cop. He is good at his job no matter what you say. He is actually a good cop when it comes down to it. And so he is going to investigate this stuff with or without them. So it's better to have him by your side so that you can help, you know, have his back like he kind of has yours. Because it's like, because in John's, I guess in one regard it's because John's already lost someone like that he's kind of grown attached to, and that was Carter, and I guess he doesn't want to kind of have a repeat of that with Fusco. I guess is one reason why. Granted, that was kind of its own thing. I mean, she ended up dying because of HR, but you know, him and her and Fusco kind of constantly got swept up in this whole machine business. But I mean, it's even more dangerous now because there's something out, Samaritans out there. So, that's because in their minds, it's like, this is a war. We don't know if we're going to win. And the last thing, it's like, if we end up dying, that's fine and dandy. But it's like, we're not going to drag you into it because you have a family, you have people that care for you. Because even Root brought it up to Fusco. It's like, there's a reason why Harold and John, everyone thinks they're dead. Is because that's the only way they could fight this enemy. Because if it was found out that they were still alive, then basically, for in Harold's case, the woman he loves would, become a target. John, I don't know, because it seems like John doesn't have anyone left. It seems like everyone he cares about is dead, which sucks. But still, never know, because basically Samaritan could out him and be like, oh yeah, John Reese is still alive and he's an CIA operative that needs to be taken care of, and the government will put all its forces to try and stop him, essentially. I mean, because we did meet his old boss from back when he worked at the CIA. Granted, his boss ain't planning to do anything with the information that he knows that John's still alive. But, it's like, you need to tell Fusco so Fusco can, for one, you need as much, because Elias actually says this, you basically need as much help as you can get. I mean, granted, he's more so leaning towards the fact that there will be sacrifices, and that's just part of war. But it's like, in this regard, it's like, you need to tell Fusco so he can better prepare himself, because he is going to go off and do this on his own, with or without you. And when he does that, he's not going to know what he's up against, because you guys have left him in the dark for so long. So tell him the truth so he can, work with you guys again, and you might have a better chance at surviving this. It might not be much, but it's like, you're stronger together than you are apart, because there are very few people who know exactly what's going on. Only 4 people altogether know 100% of what's going on, and that's the team: Shaw, Harold, Root, and John. So it's kind of hard to fight a war when no one else knows you're fighting one, and that there is an enemy that they need to be aware of. It's kind of sad at the end of it, because Root asked Max to say that he wasn't going to look at, that he wasn't going to tell the information. Essentially, the machine was like, okay, everything's settled, he's fine. It's like, as long as he doesn't talk about it, they won't. Basically, Root made him a promise, and he was like, I promise I won't talk about it. It's like, yeah, you can do the good fight. You can subtly hint to there's something behind the scenes, but you can't outright say it, because if you just subtly hint it, then it's like, okay, Samaritan won't see you as a threat. But he ended up breaking a promise and ended up talking. And basically, I can only assume she's like his secretary or receptionist. She ended up killing him, which is kind of sad. I knew it was coming down to that when, like, you see her kind of hearing the interference and writing something down like she's a Samaritan operative. And she went in there, basically poisoned his drink. And it's super sad. Because John wanted to go back and try to stop him, but, when he was on air talking, and Root's like, no, he made his decision, like, we can't do anything about it. And they actually talked to the machine, and, like, the machine knew that he wasn't 100% safe, but the machine believes, like, oh, it's free will, it gave him the choice. But Harold's still pissed, because it's like, you lied to us about saying, like, he was okay, but the fact of the matter is, you knew he wasn't safe, but it's like, it gave him the free will to do what he wants. Obviously, Root defends it. But it does kind of bring up that interesting kind of comparison, because the machine does believe in free will, whereas Samaritan kind of believes in being the guiding hand. It's like, oh, like, this is how things should be. Let Samaritan be your guide, rather, because the machine believes like everyone should have their free will to do whatever it takes, whatever they choose to do in that regard. So. And we also had that situation with Shaw, and it's kind of sad that finally we broke down. Like, Shaw is so broken down because all these simulations. It was this episode we ended up finding out they put her through even more simulations. Or was that yesterday's episode? I'm kind of getting confused now. Basically, like No, that was yesterday's episode. Yeah, I forgot. I know, I'm sorry. I'm a little tired, and it was kind of all blending together for a second there. But basically, she was under the impression, because she kind of went on another field trip, and she thought she was, in another simulation, so she wasn't taking it seriously. Basically, they needed to take out this scientist who's basically going to bring back a species that needed to stay dead, basically by Samaritan's calculation, because it has great foresight, much more foresight than a normal human being would. So it sees that basically 15 years from now, she'll successfully bring back this species, but it will end up causing a lot. It basically will lead to a lot of people dying, essentially. And basically, it's like, oh, Samaritan needs to take her out now. So basically, Shaw gets a gun and shoots her, not realizing she's a real, like, that this is all real. But then it kind of comes up later on, and it's like, oh, this isn't a simulation. It's like, look at your hand, and it's just like they broke her down to the point like that was kind of the intention to make it so that she could not distinguish between reality and what's a simulation. And it really even gets to the point that Shaw's like, nevertheless, like, if this is reality, I'd rather die than be broken down to the point that I become one of your little one of your agents. And she's about to stab herself until Root was able to get a message to her, because basically she used the radio station that Max worked at as to get a message to her, and she was like, Root, so she knows that they were coming from her, so she wasn't completely, she was, which is a good thing she got it to her when she did, because she was running out of hope. She was almost giving up. It's like she's held out for this long, and that's very impressive, because I doubt there's anyone else that could have held out as long as they did, because it did blur the lines of like, because it's like, oh, you remember the fact is that you killed John. It's like, well, you also remember the fact that you killed that scientist lady, so it's like, what's real and what's real and what's a simulation? You're having a hard time distinguishing between the two, so that was kind of sad. And now moving on to the second episode, which dealt with essentially John tracking down a number who basically went to a hospital. It's like, oh, he's just a little sick. That's what this is all about. But it's like, no, he ends up getting injected with something and he ends up dying. So what I liked about this second half of the episode, it kind of was a little bit of a whodunit, which you don't see too many of those in this one necessarily. Just like it's like, oh, there's a room full of suspects. It could be a lot of people, but like, who did it? Because it wasn't just like a regular, like, oh, he just dropped dead from what he had, because it seemed like it was just a normal flu, but then it ended up escalating and turning into something else, and it's like, we don't know if this is something that's contagious or not. But because there's only like one other episode I can think of that was close to kind of a similar whodunit, where it's like there's a whole bunch of suspects and you have to basically, you're trapped in a place and you have to figure out who did it. I forgot what it was. It's like they were on an island or something, and it was just kind of a, I don't even remember the premise of. I just remember it was like on a secluded island, and it was like Harold and John were there and trying to figure out who the killer was, essentially. But nevertheless, and it's with that regards, basically ended up finding out that basically the guy had like a specific virus inside of him. I think it was like the avian flu, and then like within those vials, it was like something he was injected with to kind of to cure his like illness. It ended up being like the human flu or something like that, and basically the two ended up combining inside of him and becoming something even more dangerous. And so you end up finding out that basically one of the guys that works there at the hospital that we've seen, he's kind of like a top guy. Essentially, he works for Samaritan. The plan was for him to essentially create the virus and basically destroy all the vaccine to it, leaving them with like little to no way to battle this thing, because there was actually no cure at the time for it other than those vaccines. Essentially saying that basically he was getting paid a lot of money to help kind of bring in the new world. Essentially, it's kind of something weird like that. All this time, at the same time, we also had Fusco looking into Jeff, which we kind of actually in this episode get a little bit more of a look at Jeff. Ended up, the Samaritan guy that Root came across is the guy they got his number before, but they didn't act upon it because the machine was glitching at the time, and that guy ended up getting a job working for Samaritan. Essentially, he has a girlfriend, but that girlfriend is kind of pushing him aside because basically he was locked up in prison. I mean, obviously he got even more time in prison because he ended up stabbing a cellmate or whatever. But it didn't, because of that, she's like, I don't know if we could be together. He wanted to kind of, he's got this new job, new house, and like new apartment, just, taking to a fancy restaurant. He kind of wanted to start fresh, but she's like, what was it? The statistic was like 3 out of 5 inmates will end up going back, and she didn't want to kind of, give him a chance. So it's like, in that regard, like me being sympathetic, show purpose wise, I'm kind of like, oh, come on, lady, give him another chance. But realistically speaking, it's kind of like, I understand where you're coming from. But like show purpose wise, I was like, oh, give the man another chance. He's trying hard, but it's like, in regards to it, it's like he is doing a lot of shady stuff. Granted, he's still in the dark. I mean, by the end of the episode, he is a little bit more in the loop than he was in the beginning, but still being kept in the dark about a lot of stuff. So basically, he was basically being ordered to take 2 shots. Essentially, they're vials of blood. There are 2 shots of blood, and those are taken from the guy who died at the hospital in this episode. Is basically inject that into the doctors. Like it was like the head doctor and like a nurse. Essentially, there were two people who noticed the irregularities with their with the system. Like essentially, Samaritan has found its way into like hacked in kind of into the healthcare system, and basically they are two people who noticed the irregularities, and Samaritan needed them out of the way so they keep their mouth shut. Luckily, John and them were there to. Well, John was there to kind of prevent it. One of the nurse, she wasn't lucky. I mean, she was lucky that it didn't kill her, but she ended up suffering. I think it was like permanent liver damage or something like that because of it. Luckily, Root was able to, the machine was able to find somewhere that had a vaccine for it, and Root stole it. So. I mean, there was even a point where Fusco got injected with it too, so it was like, oh, whoa, Fusco's life is on the line too. But like I said, luckily there was a cure for it, because like I say, the reason why he was even there in the first place is because he was tracking down Jeff, because Jeff was connected to those bodies. Because basically he had teamed up with Elias, got the name of an associate of Elias who runs does things. Basically he has trucks that tote kind of illegal stuff. He's like, he doesn't really pay attention to what is kind of picked up and dropped off. He just, he kind of sets it up so it's like, okay, here's a truck and here's some stuff delivered. Basically, the demolition equipment from last episode, Jeff was kind of driving the truck for that. So that's what he was looking into, because he knew all this was connected to those bodies, and he was trying to pick up the trail. So that's why he was after Jeff. And lucky he was there, because Fusco ended up making sure that no one else got hurt. Him and John. And like I said earlier, this is kind of the point where it's just like Fusco is tired of everything. He got hurt and everything, but it's just like he's still in the dark about this whole situation. So. Like I said, once again, you can't really blame him. And also in this episode, surprisingly, we had Shaw actually kind of breaking out, which I did like what she was saying, basically like, oh, don't worry, you're thinking I'm gonna take this glass, smash it over your face, well, kind of distract you with the glass, step on your foot, and inject you with the needle that you have in your arm. Basically, she got up, stepped on her foot, and injected her with the needle, and she's like, oh, I guess I missed a step, and then just knocked the glass over just for the hell of it. I was like, that's pretty awesome of you, Shaw. I thought it was pretty neat that she ended up breaking out of there. Basically, she had dug a tunnel in the wall behind the sink, but she had put the sink back to make it look like it was just regular. And essentially, she ended up digging her way. Well, she ended up working her way through the wall system and ended up finding herself in a prison. Apparently, it's in Johannesburg in Africa is where this whole facility is located. It's kind of where she ended up. And she ended up breaking out, which was pretty cool. She ended up getting a guy's help, which she's like, oh, next time if you're ever... He basically said he's staying behind because there's people there. He's got to, he has to leave with them. He's like, there's people here I have to look out for too, so I'll leave with them. And she's like, if you're ever in New York, hit me up. So I can only assume he's going to come back in some shape or form. And that'd be pretty neat. And in what regards, I don't know. But just the fact that they added that in there. I mean, maybe that was just something just dialogue-wise to throw in there, but I feel like they specifically showed that and had that conversation just because he will show up again. Hopefully it won't be in regards of like, oh, when he returns, he's actually working for Samaritan. Hopefully it's nothing like that. But then before Shaw can escape, she comes across that the dude who's kind of her watchdog, essentially. And he's there still trying to convince her that it's like, oh, you're doing all this. The fact of the matter is, you're still hooked up to simulation. You actually think you got away. And so, like, it does kind of mess with your mind a little bit, because it's like, oh, did she not get away? Is this really all a simulation? And she's basically like, okay, shoot yourself. And he's just like, why would I do that? That just means the simulation would start over. Basically, like, come back and just, then we could start the simulation over again or something like that. And she's like, okay, like she looks like she's giving up, and then she shoots him because she's like, it's fine, and then you want to reboot the simulation, that's fine with me. She takes his key and is like, I'll go on a joyride, then I'll at least enjoy this joyride. And he's there bleeding, which makes me chalk it up too, and especially the way that it ends with her finding out about what happened in New York with the whole disease, the whole hospital being shut down. I can only chalk that up to like, okay, it's real. Because he was trying so hard. Because I did legitimately couldn't really decide. I was like, okay, I think this is reality, and he's just doing that trying to psych her out. But it's like, Nevertheless, he underestimated her. It's like, whether this is real or not, she's still going to take the opportunity to shoot you because you suck. Because she doesn't like you in that regards. But nevertheless, she was able to get away. So hopefully, it's probably going to take a little while. I don't know how she's going to do it, with Samaritans still going to be hunting her down. I doubt it's going to be easy. But hopefully, she will be able to make it back to New York and back to the team. We ended up finding out that basically, because I thought the whole problem was like, oh, we're going to create this disease, and then Samaritan comes in with the cure. Not necessarily Samaritan specifically, but maybe someone that works for Samaritan comes in with the cure, makes it seem like that person's a good guy, put them kind of in a good public eye, and it's like, oh yeah, that person is a good person because they help find a cure, but it's like, oh, Samaritan's backing it. It's like, no, the whole plan was essentially to scare people, because basically by doing this, a lot more people are basically submitting their DNA and getting checked, probably getting vaccination for this, because it was like a really big scare, because it was like something that could have escalated and blown into something to a giant catastrophe. But luckily it didn't, but it did scare people. And essentially this is what that lady, the lady who's basically Jeff's boss, is kind of explaining, because basically Jeff was never in any danger, because genetically speaking, he's immune to the avian flu, so it wouldn't have never killed him. Because I did see John kind of inject him, but it's like he didn't get sick. So, and he kind of brought that up too. He's like, oh, I'm gonna get sick. She's like, no, you're not. That's why she gave him that job. I was under the impression that she was going to kill him. Like the whole thing was planned so that he would die. I was like, okay, I thought like either he's going to end up dying from the injection, or he's going to meet up with her again. It's like, oh, you're actually evil. You're saying I'm a good guy and all this, but you're actually bad people. And then he injects her and kills her. I thought that's how it was going to go, but it didn't turn out that way. Essentially, Samaritans basically collecting everyone's DNA as basically a filter system, and that basically they're going to run it through another filter system to kind of help humanity move along or something like that. It most likely isn't this, but I interpret that as like basically using the DNA, Samaritan's going to decide based on the person and who they are, what they can bring to the world, is like whether people are necessary for the new world. Essentially, it's like, oh, you're this and that, but it's like you would serve no purpose in a new world. You're a bad person. You need to be eradicated. The reason why they're taking out mobsters and stuff like that, like people like Elias and whatnot. In that same regard, maybe that's why. I don't know. Like, I chalked it up to basically they're going to be the Samaritan essentially is going to be the one to decide who belongs in the new world or not. It's like, if you're worthy to be a part of the new world or not. It's like, that's what I was thinking. Like, oh, we're going to categorize people by their DNA of like who's genetically better to keep alive. And it's like, oh, these other people, they're fine, but they're not like these other people. They have these genetic markers that make them perfect assets and perfect beings, perfect for the procreation of the future of continuing the world. I don't know, just me super thinking about things. And speaking of Elias, Harold went to him and got super pissed, because it was like, you kind of put Fusco in this whole situation, and like he could have died. He's like, you didn't tell me about my friend being killed, because Fusco told him. And so he's like, yeah, I didn't want you to basically go off and do something rash, and basically you went off and did something rash by including Fusco. And essentially, Elias told him, he's like, oh, you need sacrifices. That's just how things are. And basically commenting on the fact is that Harold, out of anybody he's ever known, Harold has the darkest heart. And that basically he doesn't want to be around with that dark heart kind of spills out. And it's just like, I don't get what he means by that. It's like, I don't even know where to begin to interpret that, because I don't think Harold's like a bad person. I think he does everything with the best of intentions, but maybe he's talking in some regard to like, oh, that he's keeping people in the dark because people, maybe in his mind he's looking at Harold as thinking like, oh, people are nothing, but that Harold treats people as nothing but numbers and puppets and people beneath him. Maybe that's what that regard means. I don't know. That could be just something entirely wrong, but it's just like, because I don't know how to interpret that. I don't know what he means by that. It's like, Harold seems like the furthest thing from someone with a like dark heart. If anything, it is what's his name, Grant, the guy who basically the head honcho who serves under Samaritan. But it's kind of put in a different perspective for you, because it's always kind of bouncing like, oh, like you think Samaritan's bad, but it's like even when Samaritan does bad things, it tends to be because they're trying to get a certain good outcome. But it's like, do the ends justify the means type of situation. It's like you can kill all these innocent people now, it's so to cover up what you're trying to do later on, which is for the betterment of humanity. Which, truth be told, is you're only trying to better and control humanity. You're trying to better humanity because you want humanity to be indebted to, like Samaritan wants people indebted to, because Samaritan wants to control people. Like I said, once I brought it up before about the first episode, but Samaritan's all about control, whereas the machine is about free will. The machine will kind of push people to decide, it's like, oh, like this is how the world is going to work, and you either get with it or you get removed from the equation. So very interesting episodes, really like both of them. So it'd be kind of interesting to see where we go. Like I said, hopefully Shaw will get back. Hopefully the team will finally tell Fusco what the hell is going on, because they're going to need as much help as possible in this regard. And it does make you wonder, like, now that Elias knows that his friend is dead, it's like, what's his name, Bruce? It's like, now that he knows that, maybe Elias will come out of the shadows himself and stop, being in hiding and actually help out. So I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see what goes down. But that's really all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.